We're joined today here at the CIS by Tony Shepherd. He's the former President of the Business Council of Australia and also the former Chairman of Transfield Services. Most relevantly for this discussion, though, he was the Chairman of the Government's Commission of Audit. Tony, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Good to be here.
Your report describes in some detail projections for Australia's fiscal position over the next 10 years. Why does our fiscal situation require us to cut government spending, and what might happen if we don't do that?
Well, look, we've had 10 years, we've had 6 years of deficit, and if we go another 10 years without changing the settings, we'll have another 10 years of deficit. So that'll be 16 consecutive years of deficit with net national debt rising to $440 billion. But more importantly, in 10 years' time, we'll have a continuing problem. Problem is only going to get worse. It's never going to get better. So we've looked at the future, we've taken reasonable growth projections, we've allowed for inflation, we've allowed for a little bit of bracket creep in the tax revenue, we've and assumed that we have business as usual, and we find ourselves in a very big hole. So what we've suggested is, look, you can kick the can down the road, you can leave it 10 years, then you've got a really serious problem, and the adjustment will be dramatic and will affect the individual dramatically, or you can take some incremental steps now and set yourself up for the future, get people used to the changes, put more back onto the individual, let those who can look after themselves, including companies, and we will be in a strong budget situation in 10 years' time rather than a weak one.
There's been quite a strong reaction to the report, both positive and negative. Some of the more controversial suggestions around the minimum wage and unemployment have generated a lot of comment in particular. Has anything about the reaction surprised you at all?
No, not the slightest. And in fact, we said in the introduction to our report, we expected that vested interests will come out opposing anything which impacts on their particular sector or interest. But we've asked everybody if they could just rise above it a bit and look at this from a national perspective. We can spread the burden across the society, we can do it incrementally and equitably, and nobody really will suffer dramatically. Or we can say, no, don't touch us, touch the others, taking a selfish view, my view, a very selfish view, and then the burden will be heavier on other people.
Your report focuses, and I think quite rightly, on the fastest growing areas of government expenditure. In your mind, what are the most important reforms that you've proposed in the report?
Well, I think the most important reforms are those reforms which are in the highest, largest and fastest growing parts of the economy, of the budget. And they are obviously in things like health, education, NDIS, those things that are really growing, and of course aged care and aged pension, which are all growing much faster than the economy, much faster than the Commonwealth tax take, and will not get any better over time. And in many respects will probably get worse because of the ageing demographic.
You had quite a broad remit to investigate government spending, but obviously not an unlimited scope here. Taxation, for example, was excluded from your review. Was there anything relevant to your investigations that you felt should have been included that wasn't?
Look, we were given 3.5 months to review $409 billion of expenditure. If we had to do a complete tax review, and the thing with tax is you can't tinker. We've had tinkering. We've now got one of the most complicated tax regime the world has ever seen. So tax is something that you can't tinker with. Tax is something you've got to do a deep review. Frankly, we didn't have the time to do it, and I don't think it was appropriate given that they're doing a separate, more detailed tax review, and that's where that should be looked at. However, we did look into a couple of tax issues which overlap with us. GST, we say the base should be broadened. It will help solve the vertical fiscal imbalance problem and give the states far more capacity to fund their growth. Second thing is, in looking at aged care and aged pension, we recognise the superannuation scheme is not working as effectively as it should, and we've recommended that the tax review have a very good look at superannuation tax concessions, because they obviously don't seem to be working, with 20% of the people self-funded now and only 20% self-funded in 10 years' time, then we're certainly not getting the take-up that we need. And we did say cut family tax benefit B, but is that really a tax issue? Probably not. It's more of a welfare issue.
And just finally, where would you like to see the government go with your recommendations, and what would you like to see, say, in 5 years' time, out of your report? What would you like to have seen being implemented?
Well, look, a couple of things I think major philosophical shifts would be: one is to accept the philosophy that those who can look after themselves should look after themselves. I think that's absolutely essential. Secondly, fix the Federation. I think the Federation, the problems in the Federation have been treated as some sort of political football for too long. They are real, they are endemic, they are impacting on the growth of the nation, and that needs to be fixed in terms of both the funding of the states and the ridiculous duplication and micromanagement from Canberra of the states. That has to stop. We elect the states, they're sovereign in their own right, they should be allowed to get on with the job, and they should have the money to do it, provided they do it efficiently. So I think that is a very big thing. And then in terms of the Commonwealth itself and its own expenditure, they've really got to get control of how they go about doing business. There's far too many bodies. Their program management and assessment is weak. Their grants management and assessment is weak. These things have got to be looked at, and internally within the public service itself, we've got to look at things like IT, shared services and spans of control.
Tony Shepherd, thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure.